Have you noticed how strange awakening feels? You thought enlightenment would make you radiant with love, open, magnetic, overflowing, but instead, you feel detached. Relationships that once stirred your heart now feel heavy, almost intrusive. You don't crave partnership anymore, you crave peace. And you wonder, what happened to me? This isn't regression, it's initiation, the death of illusion before the birth of real love. There's a quiet moment that every awakened soul eventually meets, the moment when the longing for love turns into the longing for truth. At first, it feels like loss. Your heart, once so easily moved by romance, becomes strangely still. You no longer dream of meeting the one. You no longer seek to be completed. Even physical attraction starts to feel secondary to something far deeper, a craving for authenticity, for the sacred pulse of what's real. This transition can feel confusing, even painful, because everything in our culture insists that awakening should make you more open to love, not less. You're told that spiritual evolution will magnetize your soulmate, that healing will draw your mirror into your life. But here's what Carl Jung understood. True awakening dismantles the machinery of projection, and that machinery is precisely what made conventional love possible in the first place. Before awakening, we fall in love with reflections, the fragments of ourselves we've exiled, now shining in someone else's eyes. The partner becomes a screen for our unlived potential, our unacknowledged shadow, our inner anima or animus. Jung described this as one of the great psychological illusions of early love. We do not really see the other person, we see our own unconscious ideal mirrored in them. So when awakening happens, something radical occurs. The veil drops. You begin to see people not as fantasy, but as truth, complex, flawed, human. The spell breaks, and the projection dissolves. What once felt intoxicating now feels transparent. It's not that you've become cold, it's that you've stopped hallucinating. You are no longer seeking someone to carry the parts of your psyche you've abandoned. You are starting to carry them yourself. This is what Jung called individuation, the slow, sacred process of reclaiming every fragment of your own soul. As you begin to integrate your opposites, the inner masculine and feminine, the shadow and the persona, your psyche no longer depends on another to create balance. Love, as you once knew it, loses its old urgency, not because love is gone, but because it has changed frequency. In this stage, many mistake detachment for numbness. They fear they've closed their heart or lost their capacity for connection, but the truth is subtler. You haven't closed. You've expanded beyond the level where superficial connection feels satisfying. You are being initiated into a different form of intimacy, the intimacy of self-knowledge. This can feel disorienting. You might find yourself withdrawing from social dynamics that once defined your identity. The small talk feels hollow. Flirtation feels performative. You begin to crave silence, not because you hate people, but because the soul is reconfiguring its relationship to energy itself. You're not rejecting love, you're detoxing from illusion. Jung noted that the early stages of individuation often come with what he called the loss of libido for the outer world. Libido here doesn't mean only sexual energy. It means the life force, the psychic energy that once flowed outward into objects, roles, and people. When this energy begins to turn inward, it fuels the inner transformation of the psyche. It's as if the soul says, for now, the work is inside. So you lose desire, not because you are broken, but because your energy is being reallocated. What used to express itself as attraction or longing now becomes introspection, creation, or devotion. You begin to see that the deepest romance was never between you and another. It was between your consciousness and your own soul. This is the paradox Jung hinted at repeatedly. Every awakening begins as a kind of death, the death of dependency, of illusion, of the old way of needing others to feel alive. It feels like emptiness at first, but this emptiness is holy. It's the clearing where real love, mature, conscious, and free, will one day grow. So if you've lost desire, if solitude feels more natural than pursuit, don't mistake it for regression. You are not unlovable. You are becoming indivisible. The love you used to chase is turning inward, gathering strength, preparing to return, not as hunger, but as wholeness. Something subtle yet seismic begins to unfold after awakening, the dismantling of the architecture that once held your idea of love. You start to see how much of what you once called romance was really projection, fantasy, or psychological compensation. It's humbling, even heartbreaking, to realize that much of your past yearning was not for another person, but for the parts of yourself you had disowned. Before awakening, relationships often serve as mirrors, and we mistake the reflection for salvation. We say, I love you, but what we really mean is, I love the part of me that you awaken. Jung understood this with profound precision. What we seek in the other is often the image of our own unintegrated opposite. The anima or animus, our inner masculine or feminine, lives in exile until we meet someone who embodies it for us. Then, the projection ignites. It feels like destiny, but it's actually the unconscious seeking its own reunion. When awakening begins, this illusion starts to crumble. The very magic that made romantic love feel electric begins to dissolve under the light of awareness. Suddenly, you no longer confuse emotional intensity with depth or obsession with connection. You begin to notice how often falling in love was really falling into a pattern, a repetition of old wounds wrapped in the glamour of attraction. This recognition can feel like betrayal. You look back at relationships that once felt sacred and see how much of them were born from need, fear, or unhealed complexes. You might even feel grief, not just for the people you've lost, but for the version of yourself who believed that love would save her. But this grief is holy. It's the mourning of illusion. Jung called this stage the confrontation with the shadow of the ideal. When the ideal collapses, so does the ego's belief in the fairy tale of completion. You no longer believe someone can heal your loneliness or redeem your past. You begin to see that every attempt to find the one was, in truth, a quest to find yourself through another's body, another's validation, another's eyes. And this is why awakening feels like heartbreak, even when no one has left. Because you are being separated not from a lover, but from the illusion that love must come from outside of you. The psyche tears down this structure so that something truer can emerge. Many describe this phase as emotional emptiness, the quiet where desire once roared. You may feel disconnected from passion, from longing, from the thrill of pursuit. The very games that once animated you, the dance of seduction, the ache of waiting for a message, the comfort of being chosen, now feel foreign. You watch the world play its rituals of romance and feel like an observer from another realm. This disconnection is not cynicism, it's sobriety. You're seeing the collective addiction to projection for what it is, a vast theater of unconscious longing where people chase reflections of what they refuse to cultivate within. Jung wrote that most relationships begin as attempts at psychic compensation. The man seeks in the woman the feeling function he has repressed. The woman seeks in the man the autonomy or power she has not yet claimed. Awakening dismantles these unconscious contracts. And when that happens, relationships lose their intoxicating shimmer. You stop confusing attachment with love, need with intimacy, familiarity with fate. You begin to see that what most people call chemistry is often the collision of compatible wounds. This realization can isolate you for a while, because now you crave something different, not excitement, but resonance, not romance, but recognition. You may even find yourself retreating into solitude, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence. The soul begins to sanctify its own space. Silence becomes a temple where you can hear yourself without interference. In that stillness, you start to see how much of your desire for others was really a desire to escape yourself. And now, that escape is no longer possible. This is why Jung referred to this stage as a necessary disillusionment. The psyche must be purified of false attachments before it can experience love without possession. It's a psychological alchemy, eros being refined into agape, attraction transmuted into awareness. What you're experiencing isn't the death of love, but the death of fantasy. It's the soul's decision to trade intoxication for clarity, dependency for devotion. You're learning to stand in your own center, to meet your emptiness as an ally instead of a threat. And in time, you'll realize the silence that replaced your longing isn't absence, it's preparation. The heart is learning a new language, one not based on craving or completion, but on presence. At a certain point in your awakening, something remarkable begins to happen. The energy that once surged outward toward another person turns inward, seeking reunion within. What used to manifest as romantic pursuit now transforms into an inner dialogue between your own masculine and feminine aspects, what Carl Jung called the anima and animus. This inner marriage is not symbolic poetry, it is a profound psychological event, the birth of wholeness within the individual psyche. In the old paradigm, love was projection. You saw your inner opposite, your unexpressed strength or your hidden softness, reflected in another and called it chemistry. But awakening reveals the deeper truth. Those qualities were never missing. They were simply dormant within you. waiting to be reawakened through recognition. Once you begin to reclaim them consciously, your need to find them in others dissolves. For women, this often means meeting the inner masculine, the archetypal animus who represents structure, logic, focus, and sacred protection. Before this integration, the inner masculine operates unconsciously, often projected onto men who appear decisive, powerful, or emotionally distant. You may have been drawn to partners who embodied control or confidence because those qualities were exiled within yourself. But as you awaken, you begin to develop your own inner authority. You become the one who provides safety, direction, and stability to your inner world. For men, the reverse occurs. The anima, the inner feminine, begins to surface. She represents intuition, feeling, imagination, and the ability to surrender. Before awakening, many men project her onto women who seem ethereal, emotional, or nurturing. They chase her image through relationships, mistaking emotional intensity for soul connection. But when awakening deepens, the man begins to hear her voice within. He learns to listen, to feel, to receive. And in that listening, something softens. The war between mind and heart begins to end. This inner reconciliation is the foundation of individuation. Jung described it as the conjunctio, the sacred union of opposites within the psyche. It is the alchemical marriage between sun and moon, consciousness and unconsciousness, masculine and feminine. When this happens, you no longer need to seek balance outside of yourself because the polarities have begun to harmonize within. But this integration doesn't arrive as bliss. It often begins as conflict, a psychic tension between the parts of you that have been estranged for years. The inner feminine may resist trusting the masculine because she remembers how external masculinity once wounded her. The inner masculine may fear surrender, having long equated vulnerability with weakness. In the beginning, these parts argue inside you like estranged lovers who must relearn how to speak the same language. This is why solitude feels sacred during this phase. You are not isolating yourself from love, you are incubating it. The energy that used to scatter into longing and fantasy now becomes devotion to your own integration. You are building an inner home spacious enough to hold your contradictions without collapsing into either side. You might notice subtle changes in your emotional landscape. The craving for attention softens into self-attunement. The impulse to prove your worth dissolves as you begin to witness your own essence directly. Creative energy surges, not as escape, but as expression. The psyche redirects the libido that once sought romance into the work of creation and embodiment. You may find yourself drawn to write, paint, meditate, or simply sit in silence while waves of insight move through you. This is the conjunctio in motion, the alchemy of love becoming consciousness. Jung observed that when the masculine and feminine within us reconcile, the psyche produces what he called the self, the symbol of totality, the unifying center that holds all opposites. You begin to feel less fragmented, less reactive, less defined by roles. You no longer identify as the seeker, the lover, the wounded one. Those archetypal masks begin to fall away, revealing something larger, calmer, more whole. This phase can be lonely, yes, but it carries a strange peace, the peace of no longer chasing reflections. You begin to see that the love you were searching for has been trying to find you. Every heartbreak, every projection, every failed romance was the psyche's way of guiding you back to this moment of recognition. The lover and the beloved were never two. When the inner union stabilizes, relationships stop being arenas of need and become mirrors of truth. You no longer approach another to complete you, but to witness the completeness already alive within both. Connection becomes less about fusion and more about resonance, two frequencies meeting without distortion. And yet, Jung warned that this inner marriage is not an endpoint, it's a turning point. The energy that once polarized between desire and deprivation begins to circulate freely, generating a new kind of magnetism. When you no longer seek the other to find yourself, you become luminous, not because you're trying to attract love, but because you've become love's resting place. This is the stage where solitude begins to shift from necessity to choice. You start to realize that you could share your life, not to fill a void, but to expand joy. And yet, you do not hurry. You've learned the sacred difference between loneliness and aloneness. You've learned that to love another truly, you must first become your own inner sanctuary. So, if your heart feels quiet, if the world of romance seems distant, trust this silence. It is the space between breaths, the pause before real union reveals itself, first within you, and eventually in the mirror of another who has done the same work. There comes a point in your awakening when solitude stops feeling like exile and begins to feel like initiation. The silence that once seemed unbearable becomes strangely alive. You start to feel a presence within your aloneness, an intelligence that speaks without words, guiding you through the spaces where no one else can walk beside you. This is the stage Jung described as creative isolation, not loneliness born of abandonment, but solitude born of transformation. It begins quietly. You notice that you no longer reach for distraction the way you used to. The need to fill silence with sound, to fill time with company, or to fill your emptiness with validation starts to fade. You begin to see that your solitude is not empty at all. It is spacious. It is not the absence of love, but the presence of self. When the psyche withdraws from the outer world, it's not punishment, it's purification. Jung understood that individuation, the journey toward wholeness, demands periods of inner seclusion where the unconscious can communicate directly with the conscious mind. The world grows quiet so the deeper voice within can finally be heard. In this silence, the soul performs its alchemy. At first, this solitude feels strange because it dismantles every identity that used to define you. You are no longer the lover, the seeker, the companion, the one who is waiting for someone. You become simply you, raw, undefined, and therefore limitless. The ego resists this phase because it thrives on roles. It whispers, something is wrong. You should be out there. You should want more, but the deeper self knows this pause is sacred. The caterpillar does not panic in its cocoon. It dissolves because it trusts the metamorphosis. In solitude, all the noise of projection begins to settle. You begin to feel the subtle texture of your own energy again. What nourishes you, what depletes you, what feels aligned, what feels forced. Jung said that true self-knowledge begins when we can distinguish between what is authentically ours and what has been borrowed from others, their desires, their expectations, their myths about who we should be. Solitude gives you the distance necessary to see those borrowed layers fall away. You start to notice the difference between peace and avoidance. There were times in your past when you isolated yourself because connection hurt too much. But this is different. This solitude does not shrink you, it expands you. It's not running from life, it's preparing to meet life more consciously. In this space, the nervous system recalibrates. You begin to feel safe in your own presence, safe in your body, safe in stillness, and something miraculous happens when you stop trying to escape yourself. You begin to meet yourself. You rediscover forgotten joys, long walks, creative impulses, the sound of your own breath. You start writing again, painting, dreaming, cooking slowly, moving gently. What was once alone time becomes communion, with nature, with spirit, with your own essence. This is the alchemy of solitude, the transmutation of emptiness into presence. The same energy that once fueled romantic longing now begins to generate radiance. You realize that love does not disappear when there is no partner. It changes direction. It starts to circulate inward, nourishing the soil of your being. You learn to hold yourself with the same tenderness you once reserved for another. Jung often spoke of the transcendent function, the psyche's innate ability to reconcile opposites and produce a third, higher perspective. Solitude activates this function. Within it, your inner contradictions are slowly woven into harmony. You begin to understand that strength and softness are not enemies, that independence and intimacy can coexist, that longing and peace can live side by side without conflict. There are moments during this stage when the old self still aches. The loneliness may rise unexpectedly, whispering that you are missing out, that you are being left behind. But if you listen closely, you'll sense something beneath the ache, a quiet pulse, a new rhythm emerging. It's the heartbeat of your own wholeness. The loneliness is simply the echo of the self you are shedding. Solitude teaches you that love is not something you fall into, it's something you expand into. Each day you sit with yourself without judgment, each moment you allow silence to wash through you without resistance. You are training your heart to hold more truth, more presence, more life. The world doesn't understand this stage. People might say, you've become too detached, or you're missing your chance. But those who rush to fill every silence never learn what silence reveals. that the most intimate relationship you will ever have is with the consciousness that animates you. From that intimacy, all other connections become clearer, cleaner, freer. You begin to realize that true companionship will not come to you as distraction or comfort, but as resonance, someone whose silence harmonizes with yours. And until such a meeting occurs, solitude remains your most faithful teacher. So, if your nights are quiet now, if your bed feels wide and the air still, don't despair. You are not unloved. You are being reforged. What you call emptiness is the womb of your next becoming, the still chamber where love is being distilled from dependency into divinity. Every true awakening casts a shadow. It is not the darkness of ignorance, but the shadow born of clarity, the weight of seeing too much, feeling too deeply, understanding what others cannot yet bear to face. As the illusions fall away, as projections dissolve and solitude deepens, a new confrontation begins, not with the outer world, but with the inner one. The part of you that still fears your own freedom begins to stir. This is the phase Jung described as the descent into the shadow, the meeting with all that awakening has revealed but not yet reconciled. The silence you've cultivated becomes a mirror, and in it you begin to see everything that still clings, the remnants of longing, the subtle pride of detachment, the secret hope that enlightenment might grant immunity from pain. You realize that even spiritual clarity can become another mask, another defense against the vulnerability of being human. At first, this confrontation feels like regression. You thought you had transcended your desire for relationship, yet loneliness visits again, not as nostalgia for romance, but as an ache for belonging. You might find yourself questioning, have I gone too far inward? Have I built walls instead of boundaries? These doubts are not signs of failure. They are the psyche's way of testing the strength of your new foundations. Jung warned that the danger of awakening lies in inflation, the ego's tendency to mistake psychological insight for spiritual superiority. It whispers, you no longer need anyone. You've outgrown attachment, you're beyond desire. But the truth is subtler. Real awakening doesn't erase your humanity, it redeems it. The task is not to reject the human need for connection, but to meet it consciously, without illusion, without dependency, without fear. In this shadow phase, you are asked to integrate what awakening has separated, the mystic and the human, the divine and the vulnerable. The part of you that can dwell in silence must learn to coexist with the part that still craves touch. The heart that has tasted transcendence must learn again how to beat within a body that bleeds. It is here that many seekers retreat into spiritual isolation, mistaking avoidance for enlightenment. They convince themselves that detachment is peace, that self-sufficiency is liberation. But Jung would call this the danger of one-sided development. When the pursuit of light suppresses the dark, the shadow grows more powerful beneath the surface. True individuation requires wholeness, not perfection. You are not meant to annihilate desire, but to understand its nature. Desire itself is sacred. It is not the enemy of awakening. It is the messenger of life, longing to know itself through form. The problem was never that you desired love. It was that you desired it unconsciously, from the wound rather than from the soul. Now that the wound has been exposed and tended to, desire must be reborn, purified of illusion, rooted in awareness. This purification feels like death before it feels like grace. You may go through days where nothing excites you, where even beauty feels muted. Your heart, once ablaze with seeking, now burns with a steady, silent flame. The highs and lows of romantic drama no longer entice you. The soul has grown weary of emotional noise. You are learning to prefer depth over stimulation, truth over fantasy, peace over pursuit. Yet even this peace must be examined. Is it genuine serenity or fatigue masquerading as enlightenment? The shadow of awakening hides in these subtle distinctions. It demands that you look honestly at where you are still guarding yourself against life, against love, against re-entry into the world. The psyche whispers, if I open again, will I lose myself? If I love again, will I forget who I've become? These fears are valid, but they are not final. They are echoes of the old identity. The one who loved from emptiness, who sought completion through others. That self is dying, and every death trembles before surrender. Jung called this trembling the tension of the opposites. the psychic crucible where transformation ripens. You are learning to hold both truths at once. I am whole alone, and yet I am open to love. It's in this paradox that the next stage of your evolution begins. When you stop running from your own depth, when you stop confusing solitude with safety, something within starts to soften. The defenses that once protected your healing begin to dissolve. You feel yourself returning, not to the person you were before awakening, but to the human you were always meant to become, aware, tender, undefended. The shadow of awakening teaches you humility. It reminds you that enlightenment is not an escape from the human condition, but a deepened participation in it. You begin to see that wholeness includes longing, that even the most awakened heart still aches, not from lack, but from love's vastness overflowing its container. And so you learn to walk with your shadow beside you, not behind you. You no longer exile your need for companionship, but you no longer let it rule you either. You can sit in your solitude without fear and still open the door when love knocks, not as savior, not as distraction, but as reflection. This is the initiation of maturity, to stand at the crossroads between independence and intimacy, shadow and light, and to realize that they are not opposites but partners in the same sacred dance. The question that arises now is no longer, will I ever find love again, but rather, when love returns, will I recognize it in its truest form? When the soul has walked through the fire of solitude, when it has faced the death of illusion and made peace with its shadow, something astonishing begins to stir. Not desire as you once knew it, but a subtler, purer vibration. The longing for relationship reappears, but this time it carries no urgency. It feels like the quiet unfolding of spring after a long winter, natural, unforced, sacred. You realize you are ready, not because you need love, but because you have become it. This is the phase Jung referred to as the return to the world. After individuation, after inner union, the task is no longer isolation, but integration. You are called to bring your wholeness into relationship, not to repeat old stories, but to embody a new archetype of connection, one where two sovereign beings meet without losing themselves in the meeting. Love in this stage is no longer projection, it is perception. You see the other as they are, a mirror of divine complexity, a being in process. You no longer try to complete them, fix them, or be completed by them. The relationship becomes a field of consciousness, a living dialogue between two psyches committed to truth. Jung called this the transcendent relationship, one where both partners serve as catalysts for one another's individuation rather than prisons for one another's wounds. You might find that the old thrills of pursuit and the anxieties of attachment no longer define your experience. What excites you now is resonance, the meeting of frequencies that harmonize rather than collide. You crave presence more than passion, depth more than drama. Love ceases to be an escape from yourself and becomes a way of expanding within yourself. In this new love, silence is not awkward, it is sacred space. Distance is not threat, it is respect for individuality. Conflict is not war, it is the laboratory of truth, where two conscious beings refine their capacity to see and be seen. You are no longer frightened by imperfection, either in yourself or in another. You know now that every human being is a constellation of opposites, and that the real intimacy lies not in perfection, but in the willingness to reveal what is real. This is love after awakening, the alchemical union between two beings who have already met themselves. It has the warmth of fire without the burn of addiction, the gravity of commitment without the weight of control. You no longer need to merge in order to feel safe, nor to distance yourself to stay free. The inner masculine and feminine have reconciled, and so relationship becomes a dance between equals, a rhythm of approach and retreat, holding and releasing, speaking and listening. In such love, you discover a new form of desire, not the craving that seeks to possess, but the devotion that seeks to serve. You want to know your partner not to consume them, but to understand the divine through their uniqueness. Their presence becomes a temple where you encounter the sacred face of life itself, and because you are no longer afraid of loss, your love deepens without clinging. You begin to love with open hands, trusting that what is real cannot be taken. Jung believed that when two individuated souls meet, their union creates what he called the self between them, a third, luminous entity that transcends both egos. It's not merely two people in love, It's the emergence of a shared field of consciousness that mirrors the divine creative principle itself. You feel it when you look into their eyes and sense eternity looking back, not because they complete you, but because they reflect the wholeness you've reclaimed. And yet, whether or not such a partnership arrives, your relationship with love itself has changed forever. You've learned that love isn't something that happens to you. It's something that moves through you. It doesn't begin when you meet someone, nor does it end when they leave. Love has become the atmosphere of your being. From this understanding, loneliness dissolves. Even in solitude, you feel connected to the wind that brushes your skin, to the rhythm of your breath, to the vast intelligence that animates everything. You realize that every interaction, every glance, every act of kindness is a thread in love's infinite tapestry. The partner, if they come, will simply be another expression of that divine flow. This is the final paradox. You find love not by searching for it, but by no longer searching. You become so whole that life itself begins to court you. People are drawn not to your need, but to your peace. Your energy, once fragmented by longing, now radiates coherence. You become a mirror where others glimpse their own possibility of wholeness. And in that space, love, real love, arises. It arrives quietly, without fireworks, without fantasy. It feels like recognition, not conquest. It doesn't sweep you off your feet. It grounds you more deeply into your being. It doesn't demand that you abandon yourself. It invites you to bring your entire self forward. When this love comes, it feels like remembering something ancient, like two travelers meeting after lifetimes of wandering. But if it never comes in human form, you will not despair, because you have discovered the secret Jung hinted at all along. The union you were seeking was never between two bodies or two hearts, but between consciousness and its own source. So now, when people ask, why don't you desire relationships the way you used to, you can smile gently and say, because I no longer confuse connection with completion. You haven't lost the capacity to love. You've transcended the need to trade it. You have not withdrawn from love. You have become its vessel, and through you, love continues its ancient work, not of binding souls in dependency, but of awakening them into freedom. If you are here, quiet, alone, at peace yet uncertain, know this: you have not failed in love. You have passed through its final initiation. What once felt like loss was purification. What you call solitude is the womb of a new kind of relationship, not between two halves seeking wholeness, but between two wholes choosing wonder. And that, Jung would say, is the true beginning of love.